Hey, I'm Drew with Tenkara Rod Co, and today we're going to talk a little bit about casting a Tenkara rod.
Sometimes if your fly isn't drifting naturally, you need to drift naturally, and then the fly will follow.
You know, a lot of the times we talk about how simple Tenkara fishing can be, and especially if you're just getting into fishing, how much easier it will be to learn how to Tenkara fish than it would be to use a traditional rod and reel. And that's basically just because with a traditional rod and reel, you have to manage all that line. And with a Tenkara rod, you have a fixed amount of line, so it is a little easier, especially for your first time out. But that doesn't mean that we fish Tenkara because traditional fly fishing is too difficult. In fact, here's my good friend Tuna bombing a few casts on a fly rod. And while we definitely enjoy all styles of fly fishing, today we're going to focus on Tenkara casting and the many different techniques that there are, because it can be pretty nuanced and versatile, and I'm going to demonstrate all those different casting techniques for you. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is grip on a Tenkara rod. Now, if you'll notice, the cork handle on a Tenkara rod is pretty long, and that's just to accommodate various different styles of grip that you may want to do. The first one, and the one I personally like to use, is this, where I'll put my finger right here. You know, I'll loosely grip the cork in this hand, and I usually have my finger up towards the top of the cork. And this just allows me to have a good movement like this. Another option you could do for grip is if you wanted to hold it kind of in between your index finger and your thumb like this, more of a V-style grip, which we end up using sometimes as well. And then placement of your hands too. So, you know, you could even grip it a little lower down on the rod if you want additional length, or if you like the way that feels. And then you don't have to use those two grip styles. You can also just hold it like this, down low, up high, or if you want to even put your thumb on the cork somewhere. Just kind of play around with it and see which grip style you prefer. But once you have that figured out, the first casting technique we're going to go over is the overhand cast. And that's done by simply first getting your grip, and you remember to loosely hold the Tenkara rod. And then I'll just bring the rod up to about 12 o'clock and then cast it back out. As you can see, the rod doesn't need to move that much in order for me to get my line out, because I don't have a ton of line on my rod. I'm fishing a 10.5 foot rod and a 10.5 foot line. So I'm only casting about 20 feet in front of me. And that's the simple overhand cast. Now, the nice thing about this cast is you can pick it up and then recast at a different angle. So if you're in a river where you're kind of moving up river, hitting different holes, different pools, you can cast to one spot and then pick up your rod kind of at an angle and immediately cast to a different spot. And as you continue your progression casting, you'll really learn kind of where the fly is going to go based on your rod length and your line length. And that's kind of why we encourage people to start with one length of rod, one length of line, one length of tippet. And that way they can really understand the mechanism behind Tenkara casting. So as you can see with that overhand cast, that'll basically handle like 80% of all the casting you're going to do with the Tenkara rod. And as you saw, I can basically place my fly in the exact same spot every time, just because I'm familiar with how long my rod is, how long my line is, and it's a very simple action. And so yeah, go out, practice that cast, get familiar with it, because that's the one you're going to be using the most. And now let's move on to some other techniques. So I just talked about casting upriver with the overhand cast. Now we're going to talk about casting downriver, pretty much using that same cast. Oftentimes you're going to cast upriver and you're going to be moving upriver because, you know, the fish are facing upriver, so they're not going to see you coming when you sneak up on them. But sometimes you want to fish downriver, and you can actually get a really good presentation, especially with a wet fly or a kabari, when you're fishing downriver. And to do that, I'm going to cast overhand kind of at an angle, and then I'm going to follow my fly with my rod. So I'm going to be moving my rod as my fly drifts downriver, and then I'll pick it up and I'll cast again. I'm going to demonstrate it right now. So overhand cast. Now my fly's in the river, and I'm just going to follow it down. I might even pulse the fly a little bit by picking up my rod like that. And then when I get to the end of my drift, I'll pause for a little bit, because that fly is going to be sitting a little bit lower in the water column. And then as that gets to the end of the drift, it's going to be rising to the surface. And sometimes fish will see that rise at the end and they'll attack the fly. And then I'll recast. If you're fishing downriver, probably you only need to cast once in each spot, then take a few steps and do that same thing. Recast. Since you're fishing downriver, picking up the line might be a little different than when you're casting in front of you. So what I'm going to do sometimes is I'll pick my rod up and kind of do a loop in the air with my line before casting it out again. So instead of bringing it straight back and recasting, I might bring it up like this and then cast out in front of me, and then follow that downriver. Okay, so some of you might want to go out and look for big fish with a Tenkara rod. And oftentimes that means you're going to be casting a streamer. And casting a streamer with a Tenkara rod is way different than casting a normal kabari or dry fly, because those flies are very light. Whereas streamer, for example, this one, I have a big cone head on and two little sinkers. So I'm going to try and get this streamer deep and give it action and try and entice the fish that way. But casting it isn't going to be overhand, because if I pick that up overhand, the streamer is going to be coming right at me, and that's a good way to hook you or someone else, and we don't want that. So it's more of a swing than a cast. So I'll show you. I'm just going to kind of hold the rod back like this and just kind of swing it out there, and use the momentum of the weight of the fly to kind of carry the cast. Normally, if you're fishing streamers with a traditional rod and reel, it's called stripping, and that's where you'll grab your line and you'll kind of pull your line in like that, and that gives the fly the movement. With a Tenkara rod, obviously we're not touching our line that way, but you still need to create movement on the streamer. So I'll cast my rod out, I'll cast my streamer out, and then I'll turn the rod sideways, and this is how I'm getting the movement. Is I have my rod completely sideways, and then I can manipulate that streamer so I can go this way as well. And I find fishing with a streamer on a Tenkara rod to be pretty fun, because you can manipulate that streamer really well, whether you want it to go deeper, you want it to swim this direction, that direction. The other thing you could do when casting a streamer, sometimes you'll be in a tight situation and you want to get your streamer out there. And so it's kind of like a bow and arrow, but with a weighted fly, and you're not really shooting it out there. It's like, imagine your streamer is a person on a rope swing. Your rod is the tree and your line is the rope. So I kind of hold it back like this as if it were a rope swing, and then you just kind of swing it out and drop it in. But however you need to get your streamer out there, that's the most important part. So just be careful when you're casting streamers, especially the heavier ones. Woolly buggers are different because they're small, more lightweight, but if you're casting big heavy streamers like those people out there fishing for carp, salmon, steelhead with Tenkara rods, you're just going to want to be pretty careful. Definitely encourage you to try it out, because it can be super fun to land big fish on a Tenkara rod. So the next scenario you find yourself in when fishing a Tenkara rod is moving upriver on the right hand side. Now I'm right hand dominant, which means I'm not going to be able to do the traditional overhand cast. simply because of all the trees above me. My fly's gonna get stuck. We've all lost flies before. It's the worst. So what do I do in this situation? I basically have three options. I can either cast out into the middle of the river, let my fly drift down river and recast. But really right now I'm trying to fish along the bank because I feel like that's where the fish are going to be hanging out in this situation. So my next option is I can just switch to my left hand, which is my non-dominant hand, and I can continue the overhand cast. It's not going to be as easy as with my dominant hand, but I can still get the job done. Just switch over to your non-dominant hand. And continue your overhand cast. The third option is I can keep the rod in my right hand, but adjust the grip and adjust my hand placement to this side. So this would be more of a prone, where my hand is on top of the rod, and I'm just gonna switch it over to more of a supine position. And instead of using the finger grip that I normally use when overhand casting, I'll probably switch to the more of a V grip, because this feels a little easier than kind of laying out my finger like that. So I'll switch to a V grip. And the other thing I'm going to change is I'm not going to pick the rod directly up vertically. I'm going to do it more out of an angle because of the trees. So I'll demonstrate that like this. This cast comes in handy because a lot of the times you'll be moving upriver like this, and there's just going to be bushes or trees hanging out on the river, and you really want to get around them. And so this is where that cast comes in handy, not only for these situations, but anytime there's obstacles and you need to go around them and still continue to cast with your dominant hand. So practice that one, see what feels best for you. Personally, I like to keep it in my right hand, unless I really have to switch to the left hand, and then it's not that big of a deal either. If you do hook into a fish with your non-dominant hand, you can easily just switch over to your dominant hand, play that fish kind of out in the river back towards you to where you can land it. Okay, so one thing we got to talk about when it comes to Tenkara casting are the different variables that are going to play a role in how your rod casts. And those variables are going to be your rod length, the action of the rod, the line length, what material of line you're using, your tippet length, and the weight of your fly. Those are like the internal factors that'll affect how you cast a rod. Then the external factors are going to be like how windy it is, what's the bush situation, are there trees overhead, are there things to get snagged on. So you want to kind of plug all those variables in when you're casting a Tenkara rod to kind of figure out what method to use, how it feels, and how to go about it. Right now I have a 10.5 foot rod. I have a 10.5 foot level line. Maybe is that like two feet of tippet and a kabari. So this particular setup is going to cast really well because the Sierra rod's a pretty soft rod. I'm casting level line, but right now it is a little bit windy. So that is going to affect how I cast. How am I going to cast, straight up when the wind's blowing this way? And that's where I'm going to do the side cast. That's where that's going to come into play. So to do a side cast, it's similar to the overhand cast, except you just do it from the side. Now you don't want your rod to be like totally horizontal, perpendicular with the river. You kind of want to be at an angle, and then you just bring that rod up and then angle that in. And what that's going to do, it's going to counteract the wind. And especially in this situation, I'm casting upriver and there is some overhanging bush. So the sidearm, that side cast is really going to be a good one for me. So we end up using that side cast pretty often because a lot of the times fish will hang out under overhang like this because it's a safe place for them. They have cover from birds. It's also harder to put your fly in that zone, and so I think they just feel kind of safe. And so if you can get that side cast down, you're gonna have a lot of luck. The other cast in this situation, as you can see, I have all these bushes right by me. It's going to be really hard to do a traditional cast, is the bow and arrow. And the bow and arrow works really well for if there's a lot of bushes, or if you have like a narrow hallway to put your fly into, or there's no room for you to get a cast in overhead. And that's a pretty easy cast. You'll just grab your line. It kind of depends on how long your line is, but I'll grab this line maybe a foot up and then bend the rod back and then just kind of launch my fly out like that. Since the rods are so flexible, it's really going to use that action to propel your fly forward. Is this cast super effective? Not really. I mean, it works. It does work sometimes, and we usually end up using it every time we go fish. But it's more because you see a spot that looks like if you did catch a fish there, it would be an incredible achievement. But most of the time, it doesn't work out. But you should try it anyway. So this is how it goes. Just grab it right here, hold it back, and then launch your fly. So I kind of talked about this before, but there are different factors that's going to affect how you cast. One of those is going to be length of line and also material of line. So before I was using a 10.5 foot level line, which is a really lightweight line. It casts light flies really well with precision, with ease. And now on this rod, I have a much longer line, and it's our crossbreed line. The crossbreed line is a great dry fly line, but it is a little bit heavier than our level line. So it casts differently. It loads a little bit better because of the weight of the line. And then when you're casting longer lines, it's just a little bit different because you need to take the time to let your line load. So while, you know, if you're casting a short line, it's a quicker movement. With a longer line, you might need to pause a little bit more before casting that out there. And then you might want to pick up your line a little bit quicker. So it's a quicker pickup, pause, and then cast. So I'll show you how that goes with this one. Pick up, cast. Still the same mechanics, just the pausing's a little bit longer. Okay, so we just covered overhand casting, side casting, casting with a streamer. We did some figure 8 casting. We did some bow and arrow casting. There's a lot of different techniques to use when tenkara fishing. Like I said before, that overhand cast is going to cover 80 to 90% of all your casting. But with those other techniques, just get out, practice, try them out. You know, the most important thing to remember is you're trying to put the fly in a position where a fish will eat it, right? So keep tension on your line, whether you're fishing a kabari, a streamer, a nymph, a dry fly. You want to have that tension because when a fish does eat your fly, you need to be able to set the hook. Okay. Yeah, so just get out there, fish, have some fun, try these techniques out, and look for some of our other videos. Subscribe to our channel, comment below if you have any questions about casting or want us to cover any other techniques, and thanks for watching.